pretty excited about what I have to talk to you guys today about. I've said this to a couple of people. If I was a PhD, so if I, let's say, was at a major university or something like that, doing research on what I do, and I, found some really cool stuff, had some major findings, let's say. I would present those, in a paper, and I would present that paper at a conference or, something like that, or I would get it published in a journal. Well, I'm not a PhD. I don't have that luxury. So, how do I communicate to you guys if I have a stunning new discovery? Well, the way that I do that is through chip talks. And today I have some really cool information to share with you guys. I think this is the first time anything like this has ever been put together. And it should be pretty interesting, I hope. Sorry about the background noise there. We'll fix that. But this should be pretty interesting. Certainly, this is going to apply to situations that happen, in autism, situations that happen in epilepsy. And this is looking to be a pretty important situation. And the good news here is, all of us are, God's a perfect engineer in my mind, right? And God doesn't really build bad systems. Why would he? I mean, gee, let's build an imperfect system that breaks. It just, nature doesn't work that way. And that's not the way that I see God's world working. And I'm sure that's not the way you see it working either. So, every cell should perfectly reproduce in a perfect world, right? So if that cell has resources and that cell has a good environment, that cell should reproduce. That should result in a perfect organ. That should result in a perfect human, okay? So obviously we're not there. We die of disease, we get sick, we get messed up. We sort of think that this is attributable to a bunch of different things that it may or may not be. But that happens to us. So we go from this perfect, God's perfect expression, and we get kind of dragged down by stuff, and we kind of find these new normals. And again, I've seen this working with people for a long time. So I can get them better, but I can't, get them kind of continuing to progress upward. To me, that's fascinating, and that means that there's outside intervention. Something is impacting them and holding them down, right? So today I'm going to talk about what I think that is. And again, this is not just Chip yakking. This is Chip doing a whole lot of work, a whole lot of research over a whole lot of years and putting together a little bit different story of how you work, okay? So anyway, that's what I hope to present to you guys today. Should be pretty cool. I'll walk you through it as best I can. I'll try to dictate as best as I can as well. Sometimes I do some ems and ahs and hums and haws and all that. So if so, I apologize. Just try to listen to the info. That's the most important thing. And at the end of this, by the way, so if you're out there and you have an autistic situation, if you have a seizure situation, if you have, a kiddo that's suffering from that, or if you're suffering from that, at the end of this, I'll have some suggestions, and we will have some supplements, or a formulation, let's say, along the lines of the suggestions that I offer soon. But again, this is, I'm kind of giving you this to you before we've even formulated in front of this. So it's hot off the presses, so to speak. We will be formulating for this, but again, I'm going to give you the information for yourself anyway. So, all right, so here we go. So, how do you work? We always have to start these discussions with sort of, let's say, top line function, right? So, what's the highest thing that we do every day? What's the biggest dance that we do? How should we kind of begin to look at human function? Well, the first place that we have to start is with clocks and with circadian rhythms, because circadian rhythms matter. And the description that I always try to give about circadian rhythms is this, is that our bodies are really good and really efficient machines. I mean, they're really cool. So how our bodies work and how they're engineered, super duper cool, can get really complicated, but is logical and easy to understand and kind of what I'm trying to teach you guys. Okay. But our bodies want to do one thing at once. So we want to kind of focus in on a major area of function at once, kind of get that done, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. So we might be building hormones at one stage. We might be rebuilding cells and rebuilding muscle tissue at one stage. We might be rebuilding immune mediators and things like that. But we go through this different symphony of function every single day. And it's super important. It's like playing an orchestra, playing this beautiful symphony, right? So how do we interrupt the symphony? Well, the things that you're looking at. So the things that are circling this clock, and they're basically ways that we interfere with our circadian rhythm, which disrupts the symphony. It's like playing bad notes in the orchestra. We kind of don't want to do these things. One of these things we kind of gotta have to do, and that's eat. When we eat, that is the most disruptive thing that we do to the symphony that we play every day, because every instrument in the orchestra has to retune around the stuff we just put in our mouth. And it takes a lot of work for your body to tear down the basically food that we ate, to identify the nutrients, to look at the fats, to store the fats, and to kind of reshape you, around the nutrients that you just intook. That takes a lot of work, right? And that work is done, sadly, at the expense of our immune system. So when we eat, for 5 hours after we eat, we kind of drop our immune system to do this work on our food. And that's super important for everybody to know and everybody to remember, because again, we can all benefit so much from intermittent fasting and things like that. So again, every discussion that you get with Chip is always going to kind of start there, because again, that's the way you can help yourself. That's the biggest thing you can do for yourself. God gave us that in every single religion as a tool. So there you go. And there it is, explained in a little bit more detail. So anyway, the things around this clock, though, are things that impact this circadian rhythm and this sort of orchestra that we play every day. So temperature does that. Obviously eating, that we just discussed. This metabolic clock is super important. Our environment plays a role in this. So if you're around noxious fumes, again, the symphony has to be interrupted to deal with the noxious fumes, right? If you're around radiation, the same thing. Again, if your immune system is super stressed, so if you're in that room full of COVID people, again, stuff that affects all of this. Now, how do we sort of manage around this? Well, we have something called the endocannabinoid system. And again, the example that I gave here is, if you're somebody who's participating, let's say, in an Ironman triathlon, and then 12 hours later, you all of a sudden get a virus and you get sick. How does your body balance and manage between all that? I mean, those are two dramatically different kind of states of function and things that need to happen, states of your immune system, work you're doing in your muscles, all that kind of stuff. The endocannabinoid system is how you do that. And that's really cool. It's the system that regulates us and balances kind of all of these different systems in our body. The conductor of the symphony might be a good way to say it. So again, the endocannabinoid system is kind of the conductor of the symphony. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bacteria. Now, bacteria, arguably, again, I'm happy to argue with anyone about this. I love to debate, but arguably are the cause of, let's say, most disease. I would kind of say all disease. But bacteria are associated with almost every single disease. Bacteria are certainly associated with cancer. Ask Royal Rife. And a long and deep story there. By the way, cancer is a, $30 billion a year industry, something like that. It's a very large industry. It's not in anyone's best interest in that industry to fix that problem. But that problem is fixable. And we'll talk about that through the course of this, okay? So cancer is caused by bacteria. So all of these apply to as much cancer as they do autism or seizure disorders, or really any type of disease. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is diseases caused by these metabolic changes that bacteria bring about. So bacteria, what are they? What do they do? Well, some of this is just logic, right? So you think about, something is trying to invade you. It needs to set up a home. It needs to establish sort of a place of operation, a base of operation, a little fort, if you will. And in order to do that, it's got to eat and it's got to protect itself from you trying to kill it. And you've got a lot of different ways that you try to kill bacteria. So these guys, and when I say bacteria, I'm talking about bacteria, I'm talking about funguses, I'm talking about viruses. So let's just sort of throw all those into a lump and call all of that bacteria, okay, for right now. I know they're different, but again, they kind of go through a cyclical thing. So anyway, in order for those guys to invade you and sort of set up a home and set up a situation, they have to jump your immune system somehow. I mean, they gotta, or your immune system will kill them. They have to jump a food source somehow. So they have to basically, eat, right? So how are they going to do that? So let's talk about that a little bit. So bacteria invade us at opportunistic times when our immune system is low. When does that happen? Well, every time you eat, that happens. So, and again, there's ways to kick that up. Turmeric is a good way to do that. You can kick up your immune so it doesn't drop so low. But if you're like most of us, every time we eat, we drop our drawers and are opportunistic hosts for bacteria. So they need a place for food and they need a safe place. They have different strategies for proliferation. So, once they set up their little fort, they want to expand their little world. And so they try to do that in different ways, and they have different strategies. Gram-negative bacteria, so E. coli is a gram-negative bacteria. There's lots of gram-negative bacteria. I can almost assure you that everyone watching this video has a nasty little gram-negative bug inside of you that set up a little home. But the way that these guys work is they signal with something called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. So I'm going to abbreviate that LPS all through this little thing that I'm going to walk you guys through. But LPS is a super important thing because they basically signal with LPS in our lymphatic system and also in our blood system, okay? But in our particular case, what we're talking about today, and kind of autism, if you will, it's definitely in the lymphatic system. And what they do is LPS can be used as sort of a proliferation mechanism. So they can invade a white blood cell at TLR4, which is toll-like receptor 4. So they use that guy to basically get inside of a white blood cell, and they rewire that white blood cell as part of their strategy, and then use that white blood cell as a new little fort, little place of operation, which is pretty cool. So what this looks like is, again, if and I'll show you this in a second of what it looks like in thermal imaging, but it looks like your lymphatic system gets super hot because, again, what LPS does, LPS is, if I wanted to look at inflammation in a rat, let's say, in a lab, so I hit him with LPS because LPS causes inflammation. It causes chronic inflammation. So if it's in our lymphatic system, we're going to be chronically infected and have an immune response associated with that, okay? So the bacteria know that. Again, part of that immune response could kill these bacteria, so they have to have a strategy to stop that from happening. They can reprogram a white blood cell to basically do something that cancer cells do. It's called a Warburg effect. And we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. So, and what the Warburg effect is I'll talk about that in a second. So, okay. What you're looking at here is a cell. I think this is an endothelial cell. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so you can kind of see the ins and outs of this cell. But the big thing that I want to show you here is the way that this cell sort of talks to its environment and kind of what it's looking for in these receptors. So you'll see sort of around the outside edges, those are receptors that will pull things into the cell. So what is it? Basically, what catcher's mitts is it holding? You know, what's it looking for? What's it listening for? What's it sort of paying attention to as a cell? Well, cytokines is a big thing, and again, that's kind of where some of this stuff gets in. Death factors, again, you can tell a cell to die at any time, and your body can do that. Survival factors are IGF, things like that. Chemokines, hormones, transmitters, interleukins, serotonin can all affect a cell. So basically, ILs can affect a cell, which is fascinating. Growth factors are involved with cancer, absolutely, and how cancer grows. So cancer hijacks something called HIF, which we'll talk about in a second, maybe on this thing. Anyway, this is kind of a complicated slide, but these guys over on the right, so WNT and Hedgehog, those guys are associated with circadian rhythm, just so you know. So almost every cell has a manifestation where they're listening to your clock, to your rhythm, because your rhythms need to be, again, if you eat, you're disrupting the symphony, and every cell needs to know that and sort of stop what they're doing, and either stop what they're doing or change what they're doing based on your eating. Okay, so this is what LPS looks like under thermal imaging. So you can see pretty much everywhere where there's a lymph gland, so under the arms, in the legs, there's a lot of heat. The white is indicated by heat. The person on the left has very hot lymphatic system. That's a lot of bacterial inflammation and infection kind of going on. Person on the right's a little bit better, but that's still a lot. If you can see the heat basically in the legs there, and then under the arms, under the neck, under the breasts, and between the breasts, that's a lot of heat. So these people both have pretty severe bacterial infections. So what else? And this is LPS. So we're just looking at basically the heat caused by LPS in the lymphatic system. Okay, so a lot of LPS. What else does LPS do? Well, again, as these white blood cells are trying to regenerate themselves, they do so with stem cells. And LPS from gram-negative bacteria can infect the stem cells at TLR4 and cause changes in the stem cells. So they can basically they can ensure that the stem cells always become the type of cells that they want them to be, not what your body is trying to make them be. So the bacteria can kind of hijack you in a way and get control of your immune system in a way where you're making cells that favor them, that are not trying to kill them, is what I'm saying. The other thing that's super interesting that they do is when they invade a cell, your body has two types of immune response. One is called a killer response, and it's your innate immune response. So you'll go out and try to kill things as sort of the first right off the bat immune response. Your secondary immune response is more antibiotic, so it's more kind of a healing response, and you can't kill something right off, but you're going to kind of go out and grab it, neutralize it, and then get rid of it. So and again, in order for me to survive as a bacteria, I got to hijack that innate immune response. So I got to hijack the killer response. And TLR4, so they invade by TLR4. Again, they've got to be able to get in these cells and do things in order to proliferate. Otherwise, they'll just they'll have their little fort, but they can't do anything. And part of their strategy is to reproduce. The innate immune system is what responds to bacteria, and is what these guys gotta hijack, and it's what they hijack by basically reprogramming the very cells that were sent to kill them. So it's a pretty smart strategy, pretty simple strategy, pretty easy strategy. So how do they do this? Well, they cause the Warburg effect, which is associated with cancer, to happen in white blood cells. Okay, so they set up a home in a white blood cell, they reprogram it metabolically, and they cause it to go into a Warburg effect. And what that does is it really advantages them. It does not advantage you. And let's talk about this real quick. So the way that you make fuel, so a cell can run on 3 different types of fuel. Mitochondria are the guy inside of a cell that dictate basically what type of fuel they're running on and kind of how that works. So mitochondria are the engine in cells. Mitochondria are arguably our consciousness, or where we hold our consciousness, and our intellect. Okay, so if you think about a brain cell, what is a brain cell? Well, it's a cell that only knows what to do by the mitochondria inside of it. So the mitochondria are the powerhouse, but they're also connected to intelligence and consciousness and kind of our connection to God, if you will. So they can run on 3 different substrates. So they can run on glucose, and glucose is super inefficient, but every single cell in your body will run on glucose. Okay, so if you give cells a bunch of sugar or glucose-like stuff, they're going to run on it, and they're going to run super inefficient. So glucose is a 1 to 2 exercise. You get 2 units of ATP for every unit of glucose. Ideally, where we want to be as sort of things of the earth, we want to be running on fats. And on fats, that is called oxphos, or oxidative phosphorylation. We get about 38 units, and actually more under certain circumstances, but let's say minimally 38 units of ATP from 1 unit of fat. So that's 17, 18, 19 times more efficient right off the bat. I'd like to be 19 times more conscious. I'd like to be 19 times more energetic. I'd like to be 19 times smarter than I am. Well, here's a way to do it, okay? So we need to be running here. But again, in the presence of oxygen and fats, so if a cell has the right fuel and the right cofactors, they all want to run in oxphos. So they all want to run under oxidative phosphorylation, which is the most efficient way for a cell to run, and it's, again, 16 times more efficient. In cancer, that doesn't happen. So your cell basically is forced back into this running on glucose situation, and it's super inefficient. So a guy named Otto Warburg discovered this in the 50s sometime. He said, hey, these cancer cells run super inefficient for some reason, and even in the presence of oxygen and fats, they still run on glucose. Isn't that interesting? And so he called this the Warburg effect. And so this is what happens when these bacteria hijack a white blood cell. And when they do this in a white blood cell, this manifests as autism. When they do this in soft tissue, this manifests as cancer. Okay? When they do this in your brain, again, seizures, but that's kind of lymphatic too, and we'll talk that through. So what happens under this Warburg effect? Well, guess what? If you've got a lot of cells in you that are running on Warburg, you need a lot of sugar. You need a lot of glucose, because now, and you're going to store a lot of fat, and again, you're going to become kind of slowly obese, actually. And the worse this is, because you're not running on fat. All your cells that are high energy cells are running on glucose. And again, if you've got an active inflammation, you're going to have a super active immune system that's all running on sugar. You seeing what I'm saying? You feeling me? You getting me? So in fact, it takes so much sugar that this sucks up all your glucose pretty quick, and these cells start eating amino acids. And in particular, they eat glutamate, a lot of glutamate. So the largest circulating amino acid that you have in you is something called glutamine. And again, glutamine, and GABA kind of play this loop and this circle. It should be kind of a reclaim circle as they're used for neuroexcitement, muscle stimulation, work that you do in your brain, right? So that should be a nice little kind of, not necessarily a closed loop, but that loop shouldn't be, the resources shouldn't be sucked out of that loop, I guess. Well, guess what happens? with this situation, you begin to suck resources, and you suck resources in two different ways. So pretty much all your glutamine gets sucked down this path, which is your largest circulating amino acid. So whoop, it all gets sucked up into the Warburg effect. And the other thing that gets sucked up into the Warburg effect is kind of your ability to use glutamine to build acetyl-CoA. And so acetyl-CoA gets sucked down in this path. And again, that's another thing that you need to use to run on fatty acids. So your body just begins to consume everything that it can find that has anything to do with glucose to be able to fuel this situation. Honestly, this is almost, is it destroying tissue like cancer? But this is worse than cancer. It's like cancer of the immune system, which is bigger and more energetic, right, than cancer is. So anyway, tremendous need. Glutamine gets basically used for fuel. It's converted to glutamate via alpha-ketoglutarregulate, which is something in your Krebs cycle, and again gets sort of jumped by this whole glucose situation. Now, cells with altered metabolism in the presence of oxygen, again, so every cell, if you give it oxygen and if it has fats around it, it's going to want to run on fats. It can't in this situation because its metabolism has been hijacked by these bacteria. When it can't, that creates something called oxidative stress. So we've all heard of oxidative stress. Again, if you've got this situation going on, you've got a lot of oxidative stress, okay? By definition, this is what causes oxidative stress. Now, the other interesting thing about this is oxygen status. So how do these cells that are now altered, again, they don't work like normal cells, how do they proliferate? And it turns out they kind of grow and they use oxygen status. This works in cancer cells too, and it's kind of well known. So HIF as a gene, HIF is the genetic structure that your body uses to sense oxygen and then make changes. So if you think about this, if there's not a lot of oxygen, let's say in a peripheral tissue, you're going to, kind of be cued to breathe more, to suck in more oxygen. Your respiration will go up. But at the same time, your blood vessels all have to proliferate out into the area where there isn't oxygen. So you have to have all this cell proliferation happen out to try to get you oxygen in those tissues that are oxygenated. Well, guess what cancer does? And guess what this strategy does that these guys that hijack white blood cells do? They hijack that mechanism and they use that mechanism to sort of turn off and on when they need to grow and build. So they use kind of our systems against us in a super smart strategy, but, evil. So what does this do? Well, if I suck all of the glutamine out of your brain, because I have to use it for, my bacterial home that I've set up in your white blood cells in your lymphatic system, what that's going to do is cause this disbalance in your brain where you have too much glutamate. Too much glutamate around peripheral, too much glutamate in synaptic, basically, spaces causes neuroexcitement. Neuroexcitement is what the cognitive elements are in autism. Neuroexcitement is Parkinson's. Neuroexcitement is dementia. Neuroexcitement is Alzheimer's. You guys seeing where this is going and how important this is? Neuroexcitement is also seizures, convulsive type seizures. So again, why wouldn't your brain, God's a perfect engineer. God built you a good brain. I have a good brain. Happy Jack or whatever that movie was. Anyway, sorry, from a movie reference. Who was it? Ben Stiller. Anyway, but so our brain should, we all have a good brain. So our brain should balance, right? So they should be able to find this glutamate balance unless there's some external situation. Again, if you're chronically infected in your lymphatic system, whoop, you're going to be disbalanced because all your glutamine is going over here to feed the bugs. Okay? All right. The other thing that happens, again, is what other resources get consumed by this? Well, your acetyl-CoA is going over here to feed the bugs as part of that sort of glutamine-glutamate loop. So what happens then? We have an acetylcholine-dopamine balance. And I'm actually looking at this situation right now for a family here in Ada that has kind of, in my mind, this situation. But what this does is it leads to muscle tone loss. Okay? So if I don't have enough acetylcholine, I can't run my muscles. And if you look at atonic type seizures, potentially this is exactly what's going on. And again, is dopamine involved? Absolutely, in these seizure disorders. So if all my acetylcholine is being sucked, I have to have acetylcholine to be able to do a muscle contraction. Okay? If I don't have acetylcholine, I can't contract a muscle at all. If all my acetylcholine is being sucked up over here, again, I don't have enough to do other things. Now, our bodies are super good. Again, God's a really good engineer. He built a lot of good, crisis situations. You got a lot of good Scotties on your enterprise, right, that are always trying to help you. But they can't help you without resources. And if all the resources are being sucked down the sort of bug hole, you're going to suffer, right? And by the way, I look at so many thermal image scans now, or I have seen, a lot of them, let's just say. We all have this issue. We all have a hot lymphatic system. Some, though, way, way, way hotter than others. So this is happening to all of us right now to some extent or another. Now, the last thing I want to point out, because this is important, and if you have an autistic kiddo or you have a seizure kiddo or you have those situations yourself, this hopefully will make some sense to you. But we have these environmental sensors, right? So, and one of them is called TRPV1, and TRPV1 is our hot sensor. It's called the capsaicin sensor. Anandamide affects this. THC affects this receptor. But it's one of our main, let's say, environmental receptors. And it's always been kind of mystifying that, like in autism, why, we just went into a room that had a certain smell and all of a sudden my kiddo melts down, right? Or, I sort of let them smell an essential oil and they just go insanely crazy for some reason. Or they have a seizure. Right, and I tried the lemon pine scented stuff in my house, and my kids have seizures now, or they are sort of worse than they were. Why is this happening? Well, this is why this is happening. This situation, this bacterial situation, in order kind of for this to work, and I'm still studying this particular element of this, but there'll be more to come here. Let's just say. But it also has to jump kind of an environmental sensor in order to work. And it looks like the environmental sensor that gets jumped in this is TRPV1. So if you do have a situation, again, you might look at things that irritate or stimulate TRPV1 and stay away from those things, obviously. Myrcene does this, limonene does this. In a way, it's kind of good how they stimulate, but again, that could be reactionary, okay? So it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing is what I'm saying. So really be careful if you start kind of playing with some of this stuff on your own with terpenes, with cannabis. If you're using medical cannabis as a treatment, you need to be aware of the terpenes that are in the medical cannabis that you're using. Because if you've got TRPV1 effectors in there, that you could have a really negative result, or it could help. It's really interesting kind of how this works. So some terpenes kind of desensitize this guy a little bit, even though they affect him, but they kind of affect him in a calming down way. Some terpenes, light him up, and you don't want to light him up. So, alrighty. Okay, last thing, glutamine, again, the thing that the bacteria sort of hijack to make sugar for their fuel, is something that also helps with LPS. So if you have a hot LPS system, what can you supplement into that to help? Glutamine. And again, if you supplement enough glutamine, you don't want to feed the bugs, which you kind of are doing. you want to kind of feed the other systems that they're stealing resources from. And so supplementing with glutamine will definitely help do that. Again, you want to do that in conjunction with other things though, because just doing that is just kind of feeding them, and you want to kind of shut them down at the same time, or at least shut down their ability to eat and proliferate. Okay, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So what is this loop and how does this work? Well, bacteria invade us, the host, which would be us, at times when the immune system is low, like when we eat. Yeah. And if you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, your immune system is always dropped. Again, for 5 hours after we eat, we drop our immune system, okay? So if you think about it, I eat breakfast, again, my immune system is dropped at 8 a.m. It's getting ready to kick back on at noon, and then I eat lunch. It's getting ready to kick back in about 4 or 5 o'clock, and then I eat dinner. It's getting ready to kick back in about 9 or 10 o'clock, and I eat that snack right before bed. Yeah. So most of us kind of live with our shields down. It's not good to fly into the Klingons with our shields down. But that's when bacteria invade us, right? So they invade us when we're opportunistic. When they do, they knock down our immune system by invading the very system that's supposed to defend us. They invade white blood cells and start changing their metabolic programming. They could also invade, again, soft tissue, and that would be cancer, but this is just kind of a more general look at how this works. By hijacking glutamine processing, bacteria also get rid of a potent agonist against LPS. So again, glutamine will kill or cut down lipopolysaccharide infection. So they hijack that and steal that for their fuel so that you can't use it to kill them. Bacteria also hijack stem cells, and they alter them to keep them from killing the bacteria. These bacteria then use opportunistic times to proliferate. If you're a female and you get sick or have some kind of symptoms that intensify around your cycle, guess what? That's when they're proliferating. So you're infected, and again, that's when they proliferate. And I see that I can literally show you a picture of how this works on a thermal imaging camera. So come see us, get a thermal imaging appointment. I'll show you how this works. We can also show you how you get better, which is really cool. But when the bacteria are active, they completely disrupt this glutamate, and it's more, you can think of it as GABA glutamate in the brain, but it has to do with the glutamine kind of loop. But they dysregulate that loop, and what that does is that causes neuroexcitement, causes also an opportunity for seizures. And the other thing that they do is they disrupt our acetylcholine dopamine balance, and that causes, muscle tone, that can cause depression, that can cause just a bunch of other stuff. Serotonin is also involved in this loop, and again, bacteria, it's looking like this, guys. When these guys get in us and they set up a home, they literally can, and they can't influence our minds totally. Okay? They can't have total control of you. You're not just like a slave to the bacteria, but they can influence you through impulses 1,000%. And if you're not aware of if you're impulse driven, let's say, or have a low impulse threshold, they can completely run your world. Okay? So, you wonder why you get those impulses for sugar? Yeah. Think on that one. Okay, so how do we break this loop? Well, again, glutamine supplementation, so same way they break it in us, same way they break our immune system and kind of hijack it and make it advantageous to them, we can do the same thing with their little loop, so we can get in the middle of their little loop. So glutamine supplementation, super important, but we've got to do this in combination with other things. So theanine, super important. Theanine's found in green tea, but you can find it isolated. It partially antagonizes. What that means is it blocks, but it only partially blocks. What theanine does is it sort of helps the brain reestablish balance between GABA and glutamate. So in autism, this is super important. So theanine, mamas and autistic parents, Your new best friend should be theanine, L-theanine, because it's going to help really that receptor balance in the brain. It's going to partially sort of antagonize or block those receptors that are causing the neuroexcitement. And it's going to help reestablish this balance between glutamine, glutamate, and GABA, okay? Berberine. Berberine is a plant. It's an amino acid, or maybe no, it's an alkaloid, actually. It's an alkaloid that's found in plants, okay? So it's found in a lot of plants, safe, all that. But it actually will block TLR4, which is the white blood cell point where these guys invade. So it'll actually block so that they can't sort of re-invade, let's say, new white blood cells, and they can't get into the stem cells. So it's really important that we have a strategy to keep these guys, or the LPS, from getting into the new stem cells, because those new stem cells will go kill the bacteria, and that's what we want to have happen. But we got to block old TLR4, they'll get altered. So blocking TLR4 looks to be critically important. The other thing that I'm suggesting and that I'm adding in here is something called resveratrol. And again, that's in green tea too. So you kind of kill two birds with one stone. If you drink a lot of green tea, you get your theanine and resveratrol. But that pushes a button called AMPK. Now you can't really push AMPK when you eat or for 5 hours after you eat. So this is more important when you're in a fasted state to take resveratrol, but it helps kind of push that AMPK button. Anything that we can do to push AMPK. So what does AMPK do? Well, let's talk about it in terms of cancer. So with cancer, what AMPK does is it pushes something called P53. P53 is a protein, and protein will kill cancer. AMPK also turns on a process called autophagy, and autophagy is what kind of create these Pac-Man cells, or turn your immune cells into these Pac-Man guys, and they'll go up and gobble up any dead cells or bad cells or cells that are mutated as to their metabolism, like what we're talking about now. So we want all of those things on. Again, AMPK is the button that sort of makes all this wonderfulness happen. How do you push AMPK on your own? Don't eat for 5 hours. That's it. So when you eat, you unpush it for 5 hours, all right? You want to know why I'm so passionate about intermittent fasting? Wow, is it kind of everything? And again, it's what God gave us as a tool or a clue, as to kind of how we work. So it's kind of a cool thing. Anyway, the neuroexcitement, though, in like convulsive seizures and in autism is related to this GABA, glutamine, glutamate kind of balance. And so theanine, again, I think is going to be super important in combination with glutamine. So anyway, that's kind of it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Again, if you're a hard scientist out there, if you want to see the presentation, if you want a copy of that, let me know. Or just, you can hit me up via email, chip@newpharma.com, or actually chip@neighborlynutrition is going to be a better email. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. If you're a scientist and you're interested in learning more about this, happy to give you my references and resources on how I built this or how we got there. I'm looking for a home for this, honestly. So if you are a serious research scientist and this is your field, I'm looking for collaborators because, again, I'm not a PhD, so I can kind of use collaborators to further this, let's say. And this needs to be studied. It needs to be researched. There needs to be grants written around this and all that. So happy to help, want to be involved, obviously. This is, some of this will be intellectual property, but again, this is too important to sew up. So we're not going to sew up a lot of this. Anyway, thank you guys. We'll see you next week for another very important Chip Talk.